The silver walls of Nexus Prime's observation deck stretched endlessly in all directions. Captain Yoon Tae-hyun pressed his face closer to the thick viewing window and watched another alien species approach the machine. This one looked like a giant flower made of blue crystal. It moved with perfect grace across the testing chamber floor. 3 days had passed since the Galactic Council brought everyone here. 3 days of watching the same thing happen over and over again. The machine would scan whatever creature stood before it. Lights would flash. Strange sounds would echo through the chamber. Then the machine would announce its decision in that cold mechanical voice. Species approved. Classification complete. Every single time Tae-hyun counted them in his head. 47 different alien races had gone before the machine. 47 approvals. Not one rejection. Not even a pause or hesitation. The ancient device seemed to accept everyone who approached it. Behind him, the observation deck buzzed with quiet conversations. Representatives from dozens of worlds stood in small groups. Some looked like walking trees with glowing bark. Others resembled floating clouds of colored gas. A few appeared almost human but had too many arms or eyes in strange places. None of them paid attention to the 3 humans standing in the corner. "Look at that thing," whispered Dr. Park Min-seo. She stood next to Tae-hyun and stared at the machine through her thick glasses. "How old do you think it is?" Tae-hyun shrugged. The machine defied easy description. It stood 20 meters tall and looked like someone had carved it from black stone. But the stone moved like liquid. Patterns flowed across its surface like water running down a mountainside. Sometimes the patterns formed shapes that hurt to look at directly. Other times they seemed almost beautiful. "The council scientists think it might be millions of years old," said Lieutenant Kim Ji-hoon from behind them. "Maybe billions. Where did it come from?" Min-seo asked. "Nobody knows. It was just floating in deep space when the Helix found it. No ship, no escort. Just the machine alone in the void." Down in the testing chamber, the crystal flower creature stepped onto a circular platform. The machine's surface rippled like disturbed water. Bright lights began dancing across its dark exterior. The familiar scanning process started once again. Tae-hyun had watched this same routine dozens of times now. First came the lights, then strange musical tones that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The machine would probe and examine whoever stood before it. Sometimes this took 2 minutes. Sometimes it took 10. But the result was always the same. Species approved. Classification complete. Designation assigned. Weavers of harmonic truth. The crystal creature bowed and glided away from the platform. Another success. Another approval. The watching aliens murmured approvingly among themselves. "Next," announced the machine. A group of tall, gray beings stepped forward. They moved together like dancers performing the same routine. Tae-hyun had learned their species name was the Collective. They shared one mind between all their bodies. 48, Min-seo said quietly. "What?" "That will be the 48th approval in 3 days." Tae-hyun nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. Why had the Galactic Council gathered so many species here if the machine approved everyone? What was the point of this testing if nothing ever failed? A shadow fell across their group. Tae-hyun turned to see a massive crystalline form approaching. It stood 3 meters tall and looked like it had been cut from green glass. This was one of the Helix delegates. The species that had first discovered the machine. "Human creatures," it said. Its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Why does your species wait? Your turn approaches soon." Tae-hyun straightened his shoulders. Even after 6 months of dealing with aliens, he still felt nervous talking to them. Especially the Helix. They were older than human civilization. Their technology could reshape matter at the atomic level. They viewed most other species the way humans might look at insects. "We wait our turn like everyone else," Tae-hyun replied, the crystal being tilted what might have been its head. "Curious. Do you expect approval?" "I expect to do my duty." "Duty." The word seemed to puzzle the alien. "Your species possesses no remarkable qualities. Your minds are limited. Your technology is primitive. Your bodies are fragile. What purpose do you serve in galactic civilization?" Min-seo stepped closer to Tae-hyun. Her hand moved toward the small sidearm all human delegates carried. Not that it would do much good against a creature made of living crystal. "We serve the same purpose as everyone else," Tae-hyun said calmly. "We try to survive and grow and help our people live better lives." "Survive," the Helix repeated. "Yes, that is what lesser species do. They survive. We transcend." The alien turned and glided away without another word. Taehyun watched it go and tried to control his anger. Lesser species. He had heard that phrase many times since arriving at Nexus Prime. The older civilizations used it constantly when talking about humans. Don't let it get to you, Ji-hoon said softly. They talk like that to everyone newer than them. Do they? Taehyun asked. I noticed they don't call the Drakari a lesser species. Or the Vorthan. That's different. The Drakari have weapons that can crack planets. The Vorthan exist as pure energy. We have ships that barely travel faster than light and weapons that shoot metal bullets. Down in the chamber, the collective finished their evaluation. Another approval. Another classification. The machine called them Weavers of Unity, whatever that meant. Taehyun lost count of how many species had been approved. The process had become routine. Boring even. He found his mind wandering to thoughts of home. Earth seemed very far away from this sterile station orbiting a dead star. Captain, Minseo said suddenly. Look at this. She held up a small tablet displaying her notes. For 3 days she had been recording everything about the machine's behavior. Times, patterns, classifications. What am I looking at? The machine doesn't just approve species. It categorizes them. Look at these classifications. Architects of precision. Masters of transcendence. Keepers of ancient wisdom. Weavers of unity. Taehyun studied the list. They sound like job titles. Exactly. Like the machine is sorting everyone into different roles. But roles for what? Before he could answer, the chamber fell silent. The current test subject had finished. The machine's voice echoed through the observation deck. Preparation phase nearing completion. Remaining evaluations, 4 species, 4 species. Taehyun looked around the deck and counted the remaining groups. The insect-like Karn, the floating energy beings called wisps, the plant creatures from the outer rim, and humanity. We're next, Ji-hoon said. Taehyun nodded. After 3 days of waiting and watching, their time had finally come. He straightened his uniform and checked his equipment one more time. Everything seemed in order. Remember the briefing, he told his companions. Answer honestly, stay calm. Represent Earth with dignity. What do you think our classification will be? Minseo asked. Taehyun watched the machine's flowing patterns through the viewing window. Somewhere inside that ancient device lay intelligence beyond human understanding. In a few minutes, he would stand before it and speak for his entire species. I guess we'll find out. The machine called for the next species. Taehyun took a deep breath and headed for the chamber door. Behind him, the alien delegates watched with mild curiosity. Another routine evaluation was about to begin. None of them expected what was about to happen. Dr. Park Minseo could not sleep. She sat in her small quarters aboard the human ship and stared at her tablet screen. Numbers and notes filled every corner of the display. 3 days of careful observation had given her more data about the machine than anyone else possessed. The other delegates thought the evaluations were random. They believed the machine simply scanned each species and decided whether to approve them or not. But Minseo saw something different in the patterns. She rubbed her tired eyes and looked at the data again. Every species received approval within 10 minutes. Most took less than 5. The machine would scan them with those strange lights and musical tones. Then it would announce their classification and move on to the next group. But the classifications were not random. They followed a pattern. Minseo had organized them into groups on her tablet. Physical builders like the rock-eating miners received titles about construction and creation. Mental species like the helix got classifications related to knowledge and wisdom. Warrior races earned names connected to strength and protection. The machine was sorting galactic civilization into categories. But why? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Lieutenant Kim Ji-hoon standing in her doorway. Doctor, you should get some rest. Tomorrow is our evaluation day. I cannot sleep, she replied. This machine troubles me. Ji-hoon stepped into the small room and closed the door behind him. He looked as tired as she felt. None of the human delegation had slept well since arriving at Nexus Prime. What troubles you about it? Minseo turned her tablet toward him. Look at these classifications. They are too organized to be random. The machine is not just approving species. It is cataloging them. Cataloging them for what? That is what worries me. Ji-hoon sat down on her small chair and studied the tablet screen. He was a good officer, but not a scientist. Still, Minseo valued his practical thinking. Sometimes military minds saw things that researchers missed. These names sound like job assignments, he said after several minutes. Exactly what I thought. Masters of war, keepers of knowledge, builders of worlds. Like the machine is organizing everyone for some great project. Or some great test. The words hung in the air between them. A test. That would explain why the machine approved everyone so quickly. It was not looking for the best species. It was making sure each type of civilization was represented. But what kind of test needs 48 different species? Minseo asked. The kind that is bigger than any one world can handle alone. They sat in silence for several minutes. Outside the small window, Nexus Prime turned slowly in space. The dead star it orbited gave off no light. Only the space station's artificial illumination kept the endless night at bay. Have you noticed how old that machine looks? Ji-hoon asked suddenly. Minseo nodded. She had spent hours staring at the ancient device through the observation windows. Its surface showed countless small scratches and dents. The flowing pattern seemed worn smooth by incredible age. The council scientists think it might be billions of years old, she said. Older than most galactic civilizations. Older than all of them. Even the Helix have only existed for 50 million years. This machine was built by something that came before everything we know about. Ji-hoon stood up and walked to the small window. The machine was visible in the distance as a dark shape against the station's hull. Even from here, its size impressed him. 20 meters of ancient technology floating in the void like a monument to forgotten knowledge. Whatever built that thing is long gone, he said, but they left their machine behind to do something important. The question is what? Minseo saved her notes and closed the tablet. She felt more awake than ever despite her exhaustion. Tomorrow, Captain Yoon Tae-hyun would stand before that ancient intelligence and represent humanity. But what would the machine see when it looked at their species? Humans had no special abilities like the other races. They could not reshape matter or exist as pure energy. Their bodies were fragile and their minds limited. Their technology barely qualified as advanced by galactic standards. What do you think our classification will be? She asked. Ji-hoon turned from the window. I have been thinking about that. We are not the strongest or smartest or most advanced, but we have something the others seem to lack. What? We keep trying even when we should quit. Minseo thought about that. Human history was full of examples. Explorers who sailed into unknown oceans despite certain death. Soldiers who held impossible positions against overwhelming odds. Scientists who spent lifetimes pursuing answers to questions everyone else had. Abandoned. Stubborn persistence, she said. Maybe. That is worth something to an ancient machine. Or maybe it will. Classify us as too primitive to matter. Neither of them wanted to voice their real fear. What if the machine rejected humanity entirely? What if 48 approvals were followed by one failure? The political consequences would be enormous. Earth was still new to galactic civilization. A rejection might mean expulsion from the Galactic Council, isolation among the stars. Captain Tae-hyun will do well tomorrow, Ji-hoon said with more confidence than he felt. I hope so. A soft chime echoed through the ship's communication system. The night cycle was beginning. Most of the crew would try to sleep before the evaluation day arrived. But Minseo knew she would spend the hours reviewing her notes and wondering what tomorrow would bring. Get some rest, Doctor, Ji-hoon said as he headed for the door. We will need you alert tomorrow to observe whatever happens. After he left, Minseo returned to her tablet. She opened a new file and began typing a report for Earth Command. They would want to know everything about the machine and its evaluation process. But how could she explain something she did not understand herself? The machine had approved every species for 3 days straight. It showed no preference for advanced technology or special abilities. It seemed to want representatives from every type of civilization imaginable. But why? Minseo stared out her window at the ancient device. Somewhere in its impossible technology lay the answer to that question. Tomorrow, when Captain Tae-hyun stood before it, perhaps humanity would finally learn what the machine truly wanted. She just hoped they were ready for the answer. Captain Yoon Tae-hyun stood at the entrance to the testing chamber. Behind him, the observation deck fell silent. Hundreds of alien beings stopped their conversations to watch. After 3 days of routine evaluations, the humans were finally taking their turn. The chamber door slid open with a soft whisper. Tae-hyun stepped inside and heard it close behind him. He was alone now with the ancient machine. The circular room stretched 20 meters in every direction. The walls were smooth metal that reflected no light. The only illumination came from the machine itself. Up close, the device looked even more impressive. Its black surface rippled like water disturbed by wind. Patterns flowed across its exterior in colors that had no names. Some hurt to look at directly. Others seemed beautiful beyond description. Taehyun walked to the center platform and stopped. The machine towered above him like a dark mountain. He could feel its attention focusing on him like the weight of a giant eye. Nothing happened. Minutes passed in complete silence. The machine's flowing patterns slowed and then stopped entirely. Its surface became as still as polished stone. Taehyun had watched dozens of evaluations from the observation deck. None of them had started like this. More minutes crawled by. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Then terrifying. Had the machine broken down? Was something wrong with the evaluation process? Finally, the device spoke. But not just to Taehyun. Its voice echoed through every speaker in the station. Every being in the facility could hear its words. Analysis complete. Subject classification. Anomaly detected. Taehyun felt his heart skip. An anomaly? In 3 days of testing, the machine had never used that word. Every species had been approved quickly and given a standard classification. But now it had found something different. The alien delegates in the observation deck began talking excitedly among themselves. Through the chamber's viewing windows, Taehyun could see them pointing and gesturing. Some looked concerned. Others seemed curious. The machine continued speaking. Subject demonstrates paradoxical characteristics. Request clarification of parameters. Taehyun cleared his throat. I am Captain Yoon Taehyun, representing humanity of Earth. We are here as requested by the Galactic Council. Species designation pending. Individual assessment required. State your primary function within your species hierarchy. The question seemed simple enough, but Taehyun sensed that his answer would be important. The machine was not asking about his military rank or job title. It wanted to know something deeper. I serve my people, he said carefully. I protect what matters to them. Define protection, keeping them safe from harm. Helping them survive and grow. Making sure they have a future. Define what matters. Taehyun thought for a moment. What did matter to humanity? Freedom, family, hope for tomorrow? All of those things seemed too abstract to explain to an ancient machine. Their lives, their families, their dreams, the things that make life worth living. The machine's surface began moving again. New patterns appeared and flowed across its exterior. These were different from anything Taehyun had seen before. They moved in spirals that seemed to pull at his vision. Clarification required. Your species possesses inferior physical capabilities, inferior technological development, inferior mental processing power. Yet you claim protective function. Explain contradiction. The words stung, but Taehyun had heard them before. Every alien species they had encountered said the same thing. Humans were weak, slow, primitive. But somehow they had still earned a place in galactic civilization. We make up for what we lack in other ways, he replied. Specify other ways. We refuse to give up. When things seem impossible, we find another way. When everyone else quits, we keep trying. Illogical. Continued effort after failure probability exceeds 90% waste resources. Maybe. But sometimes that last 10% makes all the difference. The machine fell silent again. Its patterns shifted to colors Taehyun had never seen before. They moved faster now, creating complex designs that made his head hurt to follow. In the observation deck, the alien delegates pressed closer to the viewing windows. This evaluation was lasting longer than any previous test. Something unusual was happening. Dr. Park Minseo watched from behind the thick barrier. She had seen the machine approve 48 species in 3 days. All of them had been processed quickly and efficiently, but now it seemed confused by humanity. Her tablet recorded everything as the conversation continued. Query: Your species maintains effort despite low probability of success? The machine asked. When we believe in something, yes. Define belief. Taehyun paused. How could he explain human faith to an ancient intelligence? Belief was not logical or rational. It was emotional, spiritual. A feeling more than a thought. Believing means we think something is true even when we cannot prove it. We hold on to ideas and values that matter to us. Specify values. That everyone deserves a chance. That tomorrow can be better than today. That fighting for what is right matters more than winning. Illogical. Fighting without victory probability wastes resources and ensures extinction. Sometimes fighting the impossible fight inspires others to join you, and then the impossible becomes possible. The machine's patterns stopped moving entirely. For several minutes, nothing happened. Taehyun began to wonder if he had said something wrong. Maybe the ancient device could not process concepts like hope and faith. Then it spoke again. This time its voice seemed different. Less mechanical. Almost puzzled. Species evaluation exceeds standard parameters. Additional data required. What kind of data? Specify your species' greatest achievement. Taehyun thought about the question. Humanity had accomplished many things. Space travel, medical advances, art and literature. But what would an ancient machine consider important? We learned to work together despite our differences, he said finally. We stopped fighting each other and started fighting our problems instead. Specify greatest failure. We almost destroyed ourselves learning that lesson. We came close to extinction several times before. We grew wise enough to change. Yet your species survived? Yes. Despite extinction probability, exceeding 90% on multiple occasions. Yes, the machine's surface began glowing brighter. The patterns moved faster than ever, creating designs that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Taehyun could perceive. Whatever was happening inside its ancient circuits, the process was accelerating. Final query. Your species' primary drive mechanism. Taehyun considered the question carefully. What drove humanity forward? What made them keep trying when logic said they should quit? The answer came to him like a revelation. Hope, he said simply. We hope tomorrow will be better. We hope our children will live good lives. We hope the universe has meaning and purpose. We hope our struggles matter. Hope. Abstract concept with no measurable value. Illogical basis for species development. Maybe, but it works for us. The machine fell silent again. This time the pause lasted so long that Taehyun wondered if the evaluation was over. Then suddenly every light in the chamber blazed to life. The machine's voice boomed through the station with an announcement that would change everything. Classification impossible within established parameters. The machine's announcement echoed through every corridor of Nexus Prime. Classification impossible. In 3 days of testing, those words had never been spoken. Every species had been approved and categorized within minutes. But now the ancient device had found something it could not understand. Captain Yoon Tae-hyun stood in the testing chamber and waited. Around him, the machine's patterns moved in ways that defied description. Colors that should not exist painted impossible shapes across its surface. The very air seemed to vibrate with energy. Clarification required, the machine said. Subject species demonstrates contradictory characteristics. Logic systems unable to process data. What do you need to know? Taehyun asked. Your species lacks superior abilities, inferior technology, limited lifespans. Yet you claim to protect and serve. Explain how weakness provides strength. Taehyun thought about the question. How could he make an ancient intelligence understand what humans called courage? How could he explain why people would risk everything for others? We are not strong alone, he began. But together we become stronger than our individual weaknesses. Specify mechanism. When one person cannot continue, others help them. When someone falls, we lift them up. When the task seems too big for anyone, we all work together to make it smaller. Inefficient resource allocation. Individual weakness should result in elimination, not group support. Maybe that is true for machines. But we are not machines, the device paused at those words. Its patterns shifted to new configurations that hurt Taehyun's eyes to follow directly. Something about his statement had triggered a new analysis routine. Query. Define difference between species and machines. Machines follow their programming. They do what they are designed to do. We choose what we want to become. Choice is illusion. All actions result from previous inputs and established parameters. Not for us. We can choose to act against our own interests. We can sacrifice ourselves for others. We can fight for ideas that have no practical value. The machine's surface began glowing brighter. In the observation deck, alien delegates shielded their sensors and optical organs from the increasing radiance. Some began backing away from the viewing windows. Dr. Park Min-seo pressed her tablet against the barrier and recorded everything. The machine was behaving unlike anything she had seen in 3 days of observation. Its normal patterns had been replaced by chaotic swirls of energy that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Provide example of choices made against self-interest, the machine demanded. Taehyun thought of countless examples from human history. Soldiers who threw themselves on grenades to save their comrades. Doctors who stayed with plague victims when they could have fled to safety. Parents who worked multiple jobs to give their children better lives. During our colonial expansion, a transport ship suffered engine failure near a dying star. The crew could have evacuated in the escape pods and saved themselves. Instead, they stayed behind to manually seal a radiation leak. They died, but their sacrifice saved 800 passengers. Illogical choice. Crew deaths provide no benefit to survival probability. The crew thought differently. They believed the lives of 800 people mattered more than their own lives. Belief in unquantifiable values. Specify source of this programming. It is not programming. It is something we choose to feel. We call it love. The word seemed to break something inside the machine's logic systems. Its patterns stopped moving entirely for several long minutes. Then they exploded into motion so fast that Taehyun had to look away to avoid getting dizzy. Love. Abstract emotional response with no survival benefit, yet it motivates sacrificial behavior. Yes. Species development based on illogical emotional responses should result in extinction. Probably, but we are still here. Contradiction noted. Species survival despite counterproductive behavioral patterns suggest unknown variables in galactic equation. Taehyun sensed he was approaching the heart of whatever was troubling the ancient device. It had been built to understand and categorize different types of intelligence, but humanity did not fit into any of its established categories. Perhaps we represent a new type of intelligence, he suggested. Specify new type. One that runs on hope instead of logic. One that fights for dreams instead of data. One that measures success by how much we help others instead of how much we help ourselves. The machine fell silent for almost 10 minutes. Its surface became completely still, like black glass reflecting nothing. Then suddenly it began speaking rapidly, as if a dam had burst inside its circuits. Analysis complete. Subject species operates outside systematic logic frameworks. Standard classifications inadequate. New designation required. What designation? Keeper of the flame outside rules. The words rang through the station like a bell. In the observation deck, every alien delegate stopped what they were doing. Outside rules? What did that mean? No species had ever been classified as existing outside anything. The machine continued its explanation. Warning to assembled civilizations. This species represents unpredictable variable in galactic equation. They cannot be categorized, predicted, or contained within rational frameworks. Lieutenant Kim Ji-hoon watched from the human ship's bridge. Through the communication channels, he could hear excited chatter from dozens of alien vessels. Some sounded confused. Others seemed alarmed. The Helix delegate who had spoken to them earlier was now broadcasting urgent messages to its home fleet. The crystalline being seemed genuinely disturbed by the machine's announcement. Back in the testing chamber, Taehyun waited for more information. The designation meant nothing to him. Keeper of the Flame outside rules sounded like poetry, not science. What does that designation mean? He asked. Your species maintains abstract concept called hope regardless of logical probability assessments. When rational analysis indicates failure, you continue effort. When survival requires abandonment of others, you choose sacrifice. When logic demands efficiency, you choose compassion. Is that bad? Unknown. Variable falls outside prediction models. Your species' behavior cannot be calculated or controlled through standard parameters. Dr. Lee Sun-woo, the mission's chief scientist, listened to the exchange from his position on the human ship. As the machine spoke, a terrible realization began forming in his mind. This was not just an evaluation. It was something much more significant. The machine had been categorizing every species in the galaxy, sorting them into different types based on their strengths and abilities. But why? What purpose did such a comprehensive catalog serve? Machine, Taehyun said suddenly. Why are you evaluating all these species? What is the purpose of this testing? The ancient device paused before answering. Preparation phase nearing completion. Final assessment approaches. All civilizations must be ready. Ready for what? The test. Those two words sent chills through every being listening to the transmission. The test. Not a test, but the test. Something so significant that an ancient machine had spent years preparing the galaxy for it. What kind of test? Taehyun pressed. Survival test. Greatest challenge galactic civilization will face. Each species must perform assigned function or all will fail. And what is humanity's function? The machine's patterns shifted one final time. When it spoke again, its voice carried something that almost sounded like respect. Your function is to maintain hope when hope becomes impossible. To continue fighting when fighting becomes pointless. To preserve the flame of determination when all logic says the flame should die. Why is that important? Because logic alone cannot win the test. Intelligence alone cannot save galactic civilization. Victory requires something that transcends rational thought. What? The willingness to try anyway. In the observation deck, alien delegates began talking frantically among themselves. The machine's words implied that their perfectly logical civilizations might not be enough for whatever was coming. They might need humanity's chaotic, irrational, hope-driven stubbornness to survive. Taehyun stood alone in the chamber and felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Somehow his species had become essential to the galaxy's survival, not because they were strong or smart, but because they refused to give up when giving up made sense. "When does the test begin?" he asked, but the machine was already fading. Its pattern slowed and stopped. The bright illumination dimmed to normal levels. Whatever evaluation process had been running was now complete. "Preparation phase ending," it said in a voice growing distant. "Final assessment will commence when the keepers are ready." Then silence returned to the chamber. The ancient machine had delivered its judgment and found humanity acceptable for purposes it would not fully explain. But one thing was clear. The galaxy was about to face something that would challenge every civilization's survival. And for some reason, the challenge required people who kept fighting even when fighting made no logical sense. The silence that followed the machine's announcement lasted only moments. Then chaos erupted throughout Nexus Prime. In the observation deck, alien delegates rushed toward their communication devices. Emergency signals flashed on dozens of different frequencies. The machine's words had triggered something close to panic among the galactic representatives. Captain Yoon Taehyun stepped out of the testing chamber to find himself surrounded by worried faces. Dr. Park Min-seo hurried toward him with her tablet clutched tightly in her hands. Lieutenant Kim Ji-hoon stood behind her with his hand resting on his sidearm. "Captain," Min-seo whispered urgently, "the other species are becoming agitated. Some of their fleets are powering up weapon systems." Through the viewing windows, Taehyun could see the massive Drakari battleships turning to face the smaller human vessels. Their dark hulls bristled with energy cannons capable of destroying entire cities. Other alien fleets were also repositioning themselves in what looked like defensive formations. The Helix delegate approached their group with jerky, aggressive movements. Its crystalline form pulsed with angry red light. "Human creatures," it said in a voice like breaking glass. "What deception is this? No species operates outside logical parameters. The machine malfunctions." "The machine seems to be working fine," Taehyun replied calmly. "It evaluated us the same way it evaluated everyone else." "Impossible. Your species possesses no capabilities that justify special classification. You are primitives with crude technology and limited intelligence." Lieutenant Nam Soo-young's voice crackled through Taehyun's communication device. She was monitoring the situation from the human fleet's command ship. "Captain, we are detecting increased weapon signatures from multiple alien vessels. Recommend immediate defensive posture." The Drakari war leader, a massive reptilian creature covered in natural armor plates, approached their group. Its yellow eyes fixed on Taehyun with obvious hostility. "Human," it growled in a voice like distant thunder. "Your species has been designated as unpredictable variable. This threatens galactic stability. Explain your nature or face consequences." Before Taehyun could respond, the machine's voice echoed through the station again. Every being in the facility froze as the ancient device began broadcasting new information. Final announcement to assembled civilizations. Evaluation phase complete. Species catalog finalized. Total approved species, 48 plus 1 anomaly. The machine paused, then continued. All species approved for Phase 2 with exception of Keeper. Of the Flame Outside rules. This species will proceed directly to final assessment, Dr. Lee. Sunwoo felt his blood turn cold as he listened from the human ship's research lab. Phase 2 meant the other species would undergo additional preparation, but humanity was being sent straight to whatever came after that. Clarification required, the Helix delegate called out. Define Phase 2. Define final assessment. The machine's response sent shockwaves through the gathered civilizations. Phase 2. Preparation for galactic survival test. Each species will be assigned defensive positions and support roles based on primary capabilities. Duration 50 standard cycles, 50 cycles. Almost 2 years of preparation time for everyone except humanity. Final assessment. Direct confrontation with extinction-level threat. Survival probability for galactic civilization without keeper species, 12%. The numbers hit like physical blows. 12% survival without humanity. That meant the ancient machine considered their chaotic, illogical behavior essential to galactic survival. But survival against what? Define extinction-level threat, the Drakari war leader demanded. Classification, devourers. Origin extragalactic. Estimated arrival, 53 standard cycles. Previous encounters, 0 survival among contacted civilizations. The Devourers. Even the name sent chills through every being listening. Something from outside their galaxy was coming. Something so dangerous that it had destroyed every civilization it had ever encountered. The Vorthon Collective, a swirling cloud of pure energy, pulsed with rapid communications between its constituent parts. When it finally spoke, its voice carried the weight of millions of minds thinking as one. Query: why do the Keepers proceed directly to final assessment without Phase 2 preparation? The machine's answer was both simple and terrifying. Preparation cannot teach what the Keepers already possess. Phase 2 will train species in optimal resource allocation, tactical coordination, and logical threat assessment. The Keepers have demonstrated these capabilities are insufficient for victory against the Devourers. Then what capabilities are required? Taehyun asked. The ability to continue fighting when defeat becomes certain. The willingness to sacrifice everything for abstract concepts like hope and freedom. The refusal to accept extinction even when extinction becomes mathematically inevitable. In other words, humanity's greatest weakness according to galactic standards was actually their most valuable strength. Their refusal to quit when logic said they should was exactly what the galaxy needed. But why? The machine seemed to sense the question hanging in the air. Without being asked, it began explaining the true nature of the threat approaching their galaxy. The Devourers consume civilizations by destroying their will to resist. They do not merely eliminate populations. They eliminate the concept of resistance itself. Advanced species calculate survival probability and surrender when defeat becomes statistically certain. The alien delegates exchanged worried glances. Every major civilization in the galaxy was based on logical thinking and rational decision-making. If the threat specifically targeted that kind of thinking, then their greatest strengths would become weaknesses. Previous encounters with Devourer forces follow consistent pattern, the machine continued. Initial resistance based on logical tactical assessment. Gradual realization of enemy superiority. Calculated decision to surrender in hopes of survival. Total elimination of resisting civilization. But the Keepers would not surrender, Minseo said suddenly. She had been listening carefully to every word. Even when defeat was certain, they would keep fighting. Correct. Mathematical certainty of defeat does not eliminate Keeper resistance. They continue effort based on unmeasurable concepts like hope, duty, and love for others. The Helix delegate pulsed with confused patterns. Illogical resistance wastes resources and ensures destruction. Incorrect. Illogical resistance has probability of unexpected success. Devourer victory calculations assume rational opponent behavior. Irrational opponents introduce variables that cannot be predicted or countered. Dr. Sunwoo began to understand. The Devourers had perfected their attack strategy against logical civilizations. They knew exactly how rational beings would respond to overwhelming force. But humanity did not respond rationally. They responded emotionally, irrationally. They fought hopeless battles because fighting felt right, not because victory was possible. The machine made one final announcement that changed everything. Attention Keeper species. Final assessment begins immediately. Transport to designated coordinates will commence in 6 standard hours. Other species will observe and provide support as able. Where are we going? Taehyun asked. Outer Rim Sector designated Fallen Stars. Location of first Devourer incursion into galactic space. Previous inhabitants extinct. Current status contested battleground. The human delegates looked at each other with growing realization. They were not just being evaluated anymore. They were being sent to fight humanity's first battle, against an enemy that had never been defeated. An enemy that specialized in destroying the will to resist, but humans had something the Devourers had never encountered before. They had the ability to keep fighting even when fighting made no sense. They had hope that transcended logic. They had love that conquered reason. They had the flame that burned outside all rules. The question was whether that would be enough to save not just humanity, but every civilization in the galaxy. 6 hours to prepare, Taehyun said to his team. Let us make them count. Around them, alien delegates rushed toward their ships to begin Phase 2 preparations. But the humans headed for their vessels with a different purpose. They were going to war against impossible odds, just like they always did. 6 hours passed like minutes. Captain Yoon Taehyun stood on the bridge of the human flagship and watched Nexus Prime disappear behind them. The small fleet of Earth vessels moved through hyperspace toward coordinates they had never heard of before. Fallen stars. Even the name sounded ominous. Behind them, the alien fleets remained at the neutral station. They would spend the next 2 years preparing for war, while humanity faced the enemy immediately. The machine had made it clear that no amount of preparation could teach humans what they already possessed. The question was whether what they possessed would be enough. Captain, Lieutenant Nam Soo-young called from her station. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures at our destination. Whatever is out there, it is big. Dr. Park Min-seo looked up from her research terminal. For 6 hours, she had been studying every piece of data the machine had provided about the Devourers. The picture that emerged was terrifying. According to the historical records, the Devourers have destroyed over 200 civilizations in other galaxies. They have never been defeated, never even been slowed down significantly. How do they fight? Asked Dr. Lee Sun-woo. That is the problem. They do not fight in any conventional sense. They project some kind of field that affects the minds of their enemies. Logical beings calculate their chances of victory, realize defeat is certain, and surrender without firing a shot. Lieutenant Kim Ji-hoon frowned at the tactical display. What happens to the species that surrender? Complete extinction. The Devourers eliminate every trace of the civilization, not just the people, but their art, their culture, their entire history. It is as if they never existed at all. The bridge fell silent as everyone absorbed that information. Total annihilation was bad enough, but being erased from existence entirely was a fate worse than death. How long until we reach the battle zone? Taehyun asked. 30 minutes, replied the navigation officer. 30 minutes until humanity faced its first test against an enemy that specialized in destroying the will to fight. Taehyun walked to the main viewing screen and stared at the swirling lights of hyperspace. Somewhere ahead lay the greatest challenge his species had ever encountered. Captain, Dr. Min-seo said suddenly, I have been thinking about what the machine told us, about how the Devourers defeat their enemies. What about it? They attack the logical mind. They make rational beings understand that resistance is futile. But what if we are not trying to be rational? Explain. Every species the Devourers have faced calculated their odds and gave up when the numbers looked bad. But we have a history of ignoring bad numbers. We fight battles we cannot win because we think they are worth fighting. Taehyun nodded. Human history was full of last stands and desperate charges against impossible odds. Sometimes they failed spectacularly, but sometimes they succeeded in ways that defied all logical explanation. The machine called us keepers of the flame outside rules. Taehyun said quietly, maybe that flame is what we need to defeat an enemy that feeds on logical despair. The ship's communication system chimed with an incoming message. The face of Admiral Chen Haewon appeared on the main screen. She was commanding the fleet from her position aboard the carrier Seoul's Pride. All vessels prepare for combat emergence. Enemy contact expected immediately upon exit from hyperspace. Remember, this is not just a battle for humanity. If we fail here, the entire galaxy falls to the Devourers. The weight of that responsibility settled on everyone's shoulders. 48 alien civilizations were counting on humanity to do what no species had ever done before. Stand against the Devourers and survive. 10 minutes to emergent, announced the navigation officer. Taehyun activated the ship-wide communication system. Throughout the small fleet, human voices listened for orders that would decide the fate of galactic civilization. This is Captain Taehyun speaking to all vessels. In 10 minutes we will face an enemy that has never been defeated. An enemy that destroys the will to fight before the first shot is fired. But they have never faced us before. He paused and looked around the bridge. Every face showed determination mixed with fear. They were human. They were afraid, but they would fight anyway. The machine told us we operate outside the rules of logic. Today we prove that some things are worth fighting for even when fighting makes no sense. We fight for our families back on Earth. We fight for the alien civilizations that called us primitive. We fight because someone has to keep the flame burning when darkness comes. Across the fleet, crew members nodded grimly. They understood. This was what humanity did. They stood up to bullies. They protected the weak. They refused to quit even when quitting was the smart choice. 5 minutes to emergence, the navigation officer called out. Dr. Sunwoo finished his final calculations and looked up from his console. Captain, if the historical data is accurate, we will be facing a force at least 10 times larger than our entire fleet. Standard tactical doctrine would recommend immediate retreat. Standard tactical doctrine is for species that follow rules. Taehyun replied. We make our own rules. 2 minutes to emergence. Lieutenant Soo-young powered up the ship's weapon systems. Around the fleet, other vessels did the same. Their firepower was insignificant compared to what they were about to face. But it was what they had, so they would use it. 30 seconds. Taehyun gripped the arms of his command chair. Whatever happened next would determine whether the machine had been right about humanity's value to galactic civilization. Emergence in 3, 2, 1. Now. The swirling lights of hyperspace vanished. Real stars appeared on the viewing screen. And in the distance, something that made everyone's blood run cold. The fallen star system had once contained 6 inhabited worlds. Now it contained only debris and darkness. Where planets should have been, empty space stretched endlessly. The Devourers had not just destroyed the worlds. They had consumed them entirely. But worse than the missing planets were the ships that filled the void between them. Thousands of vessels unlike anything in the galactic database. They were black as space itself, absorbing all light that touched them. They moved in perfect formation without any visible means of propulsion. My God, whispered Dr. Minseo. There are so many of them. The tactical display lit up with contact indicators. The computer counted enemy vessels until it reached the limit of its processing capability. Then it simply displayed multiple in flashing red letters. All ships, battle stations. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the bridge. Prepare to engage. But before the human fleet could fire a single shot, something happened that made their weapons seem irrelevant. A wave of mental pressure washed over every ship in the fleet. Not physical pressure, but something that attacked the mind directly. Taehyun felt it immediately. A crushing sense of hopelessness that tried to overwhelm his thoughts. Images flashed through his consciousness. Mathematical calculations showing the impossibility of victory. Statistics proving that resistance would only delay the inevitable. Around him, other crew members staggered under the mental assault. This was how the Devourers fought. Not with weapons, but with despair itself. Captain, Lieutenant Jihoon gasped. I can see the tactical situation clearly. We cannot win this fight. We should surrender while we still can. No, Taehyun said firmly, but he could feel the pressure building in his own mind. The logical part of his brain was screaming that resistance was futile. Sir, the weapons officer called out. Enemy vessels are approaching. They are not firing. They are waiting for us to surrender. That was their mistake. They were waiting for humans to be logical. Taehyun stood up from his command chair and walked to the main viewing screen. The vast enemy fleet filled the darkness before them. Impossible odds. Certain defeat. Every rational calculation said they should give up immediately, but rationality had never been humanity's strongest trait. All ships, this is Captain Taehyun. I know what you are feeling. I know what you are thinking. The enemy wants us to believe we cannot win. Maybe they are right. Maybe we cannot win. He paused and looked around the bridge. His crew was listening, fighting against the despair trying to consume their minds. But we have never needed to win to keep fighting. We fight because fighting is what we do. We fight because giving up is not an option. We fight because someone has to stand between the darkness and the light. The mental pressure intensified. The Devourers were pouring more power into their despair field, trying to break the human will to resist. Remember who you are, Taehyun continued. Remember why you are here. We are the species that sailed across oceans without knowing what lay beyond the horizon. We are the people who built cities in deserts and carved farms from frozen ground. We are the children of explorers and dreamers and fools who refuse to accept that something could not be done. Across the fleet, something began to change. The crushing despair was still there, but it was not alone anymore. Rising to meet it was something the Devourers had never encountered before. Hope that transcended logic. Love that conquered reason, the flame that burned outside all rules. All weapons target the nearest enemy vessels, Taehyun ordered. Show them what happens when someone refuses to surrender. The human fleet opened fire. Their weapons were primitive compared to the enemy's technology. But they fired anyway, because firing was better than giving up.